For centuries, the open ocean was humanity's greatest enemy, a moving desert with no roads, no landmarks, and no forgiveness. Even today, with satellites and GPS, sailors respect it. They know how quickly the sea can erase certainty. So the question is simple and deeply unsettling. How did the Vikings cross thousands of kilometers of the North Atlantic without compasses, without sextants, without maps as we know them, and still arrive precisely where they intended to go? Greenland, Iceland, and 500 years before Columbus, North America. For a long time, historians offered comfortable answers. The Vikings hugged coastlines. They followed birds. They relied on luck. Storms carried them where they landed, and survival was mistaken for skill. But that explanation collapses under scrutiny. Because you don't accidentally reach the same distant islands again and again. You don't build trade routes on guesswork, and you don't establish settlements across one of the most hostile oceans on Earth by chance. Something else was happening out there, beyond the horizon. The clue appears in old Icelandic sagas, written centuries after the voyages they describe. In these texts, Viking navigators are said to have used something called a salastine, a sunstone, a crystal that could reveal the position of the sun even when clouds hid it. To medieval scribes, it sounded mysterious. To modern historians, it sounded absurd. For generations, scholars quietly categorized it as metaphor, superstition, or outright myth. Another embellishment in stories already crowded with heroic exaggeration. After all, navigation requires reference points: sun, stars, horizon. Without them, direction collapses. That was the assumption. And under that assumption, the sunstone was impossible, so it was ignored. Yet the navigation problem remained. The North Atlantic is not forgiving. Thick cloud cover can last for weeks. Fog erases the horizon. At high latitudes, the sun barely sets in summer and barely rises in winter. Magnetic compasses, even if the Vikings had possessed them, behave unpredictably so far north. Modern sailors caught in these conditions drift off course within days. Entire expeditions fail with far more technology than the Vikings ever had. And still, the Vikings arrived, over and over again. Then, in 1971, a shipwreck surfaced near the Channel Islands. It wasn't Viking. It wasn't ancient. It was a 16th century English vessel. At first, the find seemed irrelevant, until archaeologists catalogued an unusual object among the wreckage, a clear crystal, carefully stored. It was calcite, also known as Iceland spar, the same mineral quietly described. In the sagas, calcite does something extraordinary. It interacts with light in a way most materials do not. When sunlight passes through Earth's atmosphere, it scatters, even when the sun is hidden behind thick cloud cover. That scattered light still carries information, polarization patterns that point directly back to the sun's true position. Human eyes cannot see this, but calcite can. When you look through a sunstone and rotate it, the light splits into two images. At one precise angle, those images equalize in brightness. And at that exact moment, the crystal reveals where the sun actually is, even when it is completely invisible in the sky. Not approximately, precisely. To a trained navigator, this was enough. Direction could be set, course corrected, latitude maintained. The Vikings weren't guessing. They were reading the sky in a way modern humans had forgotten how to do. When this idea resurfaced in scientific circles in the late 20th century, the reaction was swift and dismissive. Researchers argued the method would be too inaccurate, that cloud density would disrupt polarization, that the movement of a ship would make readings unreliable, that the level of precision required was unrealistic. In other words, it was a clever theory, but impossible in practice, except no one had actually tested it. That changed in the early 2010s. A team of physicists and archaeologists decided to recreate Viking conditions as closely as possible. Overcast skies, low sun angles, rough seas, handheld crystals, no modern instruments, no digital correction. They trained ordinary participants, not expert navigators, to use sunstones. Then they sent them out and measured the results. What they found forced a re-evaluation. By using sunstones every few hours, navigators were able to maintain a course with an average error margin of less than 5 degrees over long distances. That accuracy was not just impressive, it was decisive. It was enough to reach Iceland, enough to reach Greenland, enough to reach North America. Not once, repeatedly, the impossible method worked. The scientific community did not announce this with drama. There were no headlines, no grand declarations. But peer-reviewed papers quietly confirmed it. Museums updated exhibits. Textbooks softened their language. The Viking Sunstone was no longer a myth. It was a lost technology, and it raised an uncomfortable question. Why did it take 800 years to believe it? The answer lies in assumption. Accepting the Sunstone means accepting that advanced navigation does not require complex instruments, that ancient knowledge can outperform later technology, that medieval sailors understood atmospheric optics without equations or laboratories, that oral traditions preserved real, functional science. Most unsettling of all, it challenges the idea that progress is linear, that the past was ignorant and the present is enlightened. The Vikings' true advantage was not strength or fearlessness. It was systems, sunstones for cloudy days, shadow boards for clear skies, mental maps refined across generations, a deep, practical understanding of winds, currents, and light. They did not conquer the ocean by force. They listened to it. And once we finally understood that, the mystery shifted. The question is no longer how the Vikings crossed the ocean without instruments. The real question is how many other impossible ancient technologies we dismissed, not because they didn't work, but because we didn't understand them. The Vikings crossed an ocean that still humbles modern sailors, not through luck, and not through myth, but through precision we are only now beginning to recognize. And maybe the greatest discovery wasn't the Sunstone itself. Maybe it was realizing just how much we forgot. If you want, I can.